Okay, so my name's Simon Warner. I'm the head of fixed income at AMP Capital. Thanks very much for coming today. We've got a really fascinating topic for the next hour. We're going to talk about bitcoins and cryptocurrencies and some of the stuff that can flow from that. I was a ring-in for this, so I was only told late yesterday that I was going to be introducing this session, so forgive me while I stumble with some of my notes. But you know, the main purpose of us getting together here is obviously to collaborate. We're going to learn a lot from John, but it's also a great opportunity to ask questions on online, ask questions in the room, ask questions afterwards, contribute to the discussion. The social media of Amplify is up and running on every format you can imagine: Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, hashtag AmplifyFest. So let's get on. It's a great honor for us today to have Jon Matonis here. He is a founding director of the Bitcoin Foundation. He's a crypto economist, and he specializes in researching cryptocurrencies and how they will expand the circulation of non-political digital currencies. He advises a ton of Bitcoin startups, as well as other businesses on electronic currencies. He is a tech contributor to Forbes Magazine. He's also the editor of The Monetary Future. He's a former board director of the Bitcoin Foundation. Prior to this life, he had another life as in the more conventional financial services roles as a Forex trader of Visa. So he's to blame for those juicy bid offer spreads Visa cards charge you, which we might get to. So thanks for everybody for coming, particularly the AMP board members. I understand there are lots of external people from outside AMP. We're very much welcome to you too. And with that, I'm sure I've missed some of my housekeeping, but let's get on with it instead. John.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Bitcoin has a great story, an excellent story, which matches the theme of the Amplify conference. So kudos to the Amplify leaders for getting Bitcoin here, because it's a great match. And I want to start off and set the mood with a short video on Argentina. So go ahead.
So when I came to Argentina 6 months ago, I experienced a country where the government is nationalizing and taking over local businesses. You have 25 to 30% inflation. You have price controls. And in general, monetary restrictions. The locals cannot go to the bank and exchange their pesos for euro or for dollars. And they cannot do international bank transfers. You have this beautiful country and charming people and welcoming nature, but it's a trap. It's a monetary trap.
Thousands of people protested in the Argentinian capital Buenos Aires and other cities against the policies of President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. The demonstrators are angry about rising inflation, high crime and corruption. They were also protesting against limits on foreign imports and restrictions on dollar purchases.
In reality, the inflation rate, it's about 20 or 25% a year. So you will lose 25% of your money each year if you have your money in pesos. you are not supposed to say what is the inflation, because there are some controls on the agencies that give those numbers. You cannot buy dollars, I mean legally. I think you also cannot buy gold, because there are some restrictions.
Ahora tienen miedo la gente. No hay trabajo para los pibes. No hay nada. No hay trabajo. Sí, se ven muy abajo, si no hay gente, no hay nadie. Está vacío, no hay plata. Ya no sabe qué pensar.
Well, you could buy dollars on the black market, or you could exchange your pesos for bitcoins.
Sí, tanto dinero. ¿Por qué no dan trabajo a la gente? Este año fue más jodido. Ese es el problema.
Bitcoins is the best. If it succeeds, that would be the perfect currency to make transactions in this global world.
So I heard about Bitcoins for the first time back in 2011. I remember I was reading this post online, blog post about these guys wanted to create a new currency. And I mean, a new currency was just like, I was intrigued by the idea that, but just by creating some software, you can actually create new money and create a new currency. And it sounded very interesting. So I went on and bought some Bitcoins back then.
What is Bitcoins? Bitcoins is a digital currency. It's like gold, but only that you cannot see it in the way you see gold. I mean, it's gold. It has the same characteristic. It can be mined. It can be exchanged. And there is no central authority that controls that.
So Bitcoins is basically electronic cash. You can send Bitcoins anywhere around the world within seconds with a click on your mouse. And you can go to these Bitcoin exchanges and buy Bitcoins for dollars or for euro or for any other currency. You can simply just buy Bitcoins. The beautiful thing about Bitcoins compared to other currency is there is a fixed limited number of total Bitcoins. Meaning that within the Bitcoin economy, you will not see inflation as in other currencies.
Okay, so that's what I call market-based legitimacy. Bitcoin has achieved the market-based legitimacy in a very short period of time, only 6 years, and people are already willing to trade their nationally issued Argentinian pesos and risk putting money into something like a digital currency, a new cryptocurrency. So I just want to do a quick survey in the audience. How many people know someone in their work or family that's like totally obsessed with Bitcoin and keeps talking about it? Okay, now, so how many people in the audience actually have a Bitcoin wallet? Okay, well, that's pretty much the same number of people. That's good. Today, if you ever wanted to know the story of Bitcoin, the full story of Bitcoin, well, today's your lucky day. Because in about 30 minutes, I'm going to try to convey a story to you that you'll remember and that you'll be able to tell other people along the way. The number one takeaway, the most important thing that I want to get across today, I think, as the session takeaway, is that Bitcoin doesn't really represent just payments, just small fee payments or replacing Visa, replacing MasterCard. It's so much more than that because it represents a bottom-up consensus for what we see as value, rather than the top-down type of value that we get from national currencies. And that's very important. If we can grasp that and why bottom-up consensus for value is important, then we can realize why cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are important and why the power is really with all of us to determine what that bottom-up consensus is. So let's start the story, because the story for Bitcoin starts in the islands of Yap. And I'm going to walk around just because I have a lot of pent-up energy. But what does giant stone money have to do with a digital currency? The reason that that's on there is because these stones represented wealth for the tribes and for the tribal chiefs. They would keep their wealth on these stones. And each tribe knew who owned which stones. So after a certain amount of time went by, they stopped moving them. They just stayed where they were because everybody knew who owned what and what value it represented. So that's shared consensus. The Bitcoin blockchain is very similar to that because it's like a giant public ledger in the cloud of what we all own on Bitcoin. When I pay someone in Bitcoin, I don't take anything out of my pocket and give it to you. I'm actually just reallocating my ownership rights on that public ledger in the cloud. A lot like these stones. The other concept for Bitcoin is the distributed network. Now, what do aliens have to do with the digital currency? Well, up until 2013, this was the largest distributed computing project on the planet, the SETI project. It's where dormant computer time from various universities everywhere around the world was consolidated in the search for radio signals from outer space. I mean, it's still going on. They haven't found anything yet. But Bitcoin has surpassed this project to become the world's leading distributed computing project. And it passed it by a wide, wide margin. The computational power that is on that contributes to the Bitcoin network, that secures the Bitcoin network worldwide, is 1,000 times stronger than the top 500 supercomputers in the world. And I'll get out of the way for the picture, but this represents the consolidated power of the Bitcoin network. It's expressed in terahashes per second. That's the computational power of all the consolidated computers that are on the network. And what they're doing is they're solving cryptographic math puzzles in a race to solve the puzzle, which will find the next block and be able to add the last 10 minutes of transactions to the blockchain. That's what's going on here. And this power, it's stabilizing now, but it's at approximately 350,000 terahashes per second, which is stronger and more powerful than any centralized computer network. It even has more power than the Visa Processing Center, the Google set of deployed data centers. And every time a block is found, it's added to the existing blockchain. The blockchain represents the history of transactions for the last 6 years. 6 years or more, because it started in January 2009. And every 10 minutes, a new block is created, and you can think of it as a batch of transactions. So similar to a credit card batch of transactions, what's happening here is they're being, the Bitcoin miners are acting as transaction processors, confirming the transactions and then securing the blockchain. There's currently more than 355,000 blocks that have been created, and the current network throughput is 7 transactions per second. The majority of the mining pools, or the majority of the Bitcoin mining, is now done by pools. It used to be that you could have a home computer or a laptop that was just left on mining for Bitcoin. That was like in the first 2 years. Then it progressed to GPUs. Now we've gotten to the world of ASICs, which are application-specific integrated circuits. And these are chips that are fabricated and manufactured to do one thing only, and that's mine Bitcoin. That's their only purpose. And that's what we've progressed to in Bitcoin mining. This is the hash rate distribution showing the decentralized nature of that network. So you can see that it's not controlled by any one single entity or any one single pool. This is actually a graph of decentralization. It's showing that each one of those vertical color bands is a mining pool. And there's no single point of failure in the network because it's distributed over 25, 30 players, which each also have many individual components within that pool. It's also distributed around the world in almost every country in the world right now. The top three are US, Germany, and France. Australia is on there as number 8. The Netherlands is number 6. The Netherlands is not number 6 in population, but there's a lot of Bitcoin activity going on in the Netherlands right now. And if you click on the bottom of this, it's a website, you can actually get the full list of all the countries. It's bitnodes.io. So why is decentralizing trust so important? Well, the main reason it's important is because if you can decentralize trust, you can remove the financial intermediary from transactions. You don't need a third party to complete your transactions. We've never had this before in the financial world. We've always had to go through a trusted intermediary or a trusted third party. Well, with Bitcoin and the decentralized blockchain, you don't have to do that. You also remove a single point of failure, so you build resiliency into the network. The Byzantine generals problem is the fundamental problem that Bitcoin solved when it came out in 2009. It wasn't solving, there wasn't any really new cryptography because the cryptographic primitives have been around. The new breakthrough was in preventing the double spending on the network with electronic cash without having a centralized mint. Now, the Byzantine generals problem, it was a long-standing computer network problem that remained, unsolved for 40 or 50 years. You can look it up. But that was the breakthrough. The decentralized blockchain for Bitcoin essentially solved the Byzantine generals problem. We've had about over $1 billion now invested in Bitcoin startups from venture capital and private equity. What do these VCs see in Bitcoin? Because they're not after it for payments. They don't think it's going to be like the next Square. They think it's going to be a fundamental building block of the internet, the missing piece for money over internet protocol. So just like Skype is VoIP, the venture capital community sees Bitcoin as MoIP. Now, we don't know if they're right, but if they turn out to be right, these are very, very early days for something like that's going to be as big as the de facto standard for value transfer protocol over the internet. And that's why you see the excitement around the investing. Okay, so if we don't have a single point of failure and everything on the Bitcoin network is decentralized, then we don't have a world of central banking. We have decentral banks of the future. This is somebody's house who probably started out as a hobbyist and then got a little carried away and just kept buying and buying and buying. It's probably throwing off a lot of heat, so hopefully he's heating his home with it. But you can't mine like this anymore. This was in the early days, before the ASICs and the specialized hardware. These types of mining operations have now evolved into things like this. This is a data center where every single computer that you see on there is only mining Bitcoin. And they represent about 6.4% of the entire computational power of the consolidated network. That's the kind of data center that it takes to represent 6.4%. This one is in Sweden. It's up in the Arctic Circle. They're building 2 more just like it. And the reason it's up in the Arctic Circle is because it's in an old airplane hangar, and they can open the doors on either side and let the Arctic air come through. So they essentially get a free air conditioning. Not to mention the subsidized electricity that you get when you're outside of Stockholm. The only thing is they have to take a helicopter to get there. So that's in Sweden. The company's called KNC Miner. This mining facility is in Thailand, and they did not have proper cooling. The entire building, the entire data center went up in flames in November of last year. The important thing about it, though, is that it didn't even affect the network. It represented about 1.5% of the computational power, but the network didn't even skip a beat. It continued to process, and for the most part, people didn't notice. If this had happened to a centralized data center like Swift or Visa, you would have had some serious service disruptions. But with the resiliency of a distributed network, everybody kept marching right along. So the network has no single point of failure. What does that mean for the architecture? Well, it's what gives us the resiliency. And it also allows us in the payments and finance area to bypass certain legacy systems. You don't have to go through SWIFT now to do a wholesale commercial transaction. You can complete it through a Bitcoin network. As long as you have liquidity on both sides, you're able to bypass things like SWIFT. SWIFT, by the way, is looking at this technology, and they're investing a lot of money into the research and some of the startups. But suffice it to say, though, that Bitcoin represents disruption within disruption. It's not like PayPal, which is just a network that clears other national units, national currencies. The Bitcoin network also has its own independent monetary unit with a small b, the Bitcoin monetary unit, and the capital B is the Bitcoin network. Now, PayPal doesn't have their own monetary unit. Visa doesn't have their own monetary unit. So that's a fundamental difference. And it's actually a very bold step because it's demonstrated that we don't need kings to coin our money. Bitcoin has shown that we no longer need a sovereign issuer to use our money, to print our money. And it's done that through market-based legitimacy in about 6 years. One of the reasons it's done that is because of the controlled supply. So there will only be 21 million Bitcoin in the world. Now, before you say, well, that's not enough for everybody in California, it doesn't really matter because it's arbitrary. It's just an integer, and you currently have 8 decimal spaces to the right of the decimal point. You could increase that to 16. So instead of doing what Zimbabwe does, where they add zeros to the left of the decimal point, Bitcoin adds decimal points, decimal spaces to the right of the decimal point. And you can go in and in and in and in. And it's even better than gold because every subdivided unit is just as usable. If you subdivide gold, you end up with dust, unusable dust. So it's another important distinction. This is the market cap of Bitcoin, which is essentially all of the Bitcoin that have been issued multiplied by the market price. So the high was in December of 2013. That high represented a price of about $1,200 US dollars per Bitcoin. Now the price is about 230. So the other way to think about this is it represents base money supply, or M0, at the current level for Bitcoin. When Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, released the code into the wild, the primary motivation that he had was to emulate and replace the features of physical paper cash, because he saw a world that was going cashless very rapidly, and we were losing the privacy features that we had with paper cash. So if you look at what those features are, Bitcoin represents those in the digital space. So it has reasonable privacy. It's a bearer instrument. It has fungibility, which is really mutual substitution. Every Bitcoin is the same as every other Bitcoin, just like every pound is the same as every other pound. These are important qualities for a monetary system. Now, Bitcoin didn't make up these attributes. It's not asking for any more privacy than you already have with the paper cash that's in your pocket today. So it's not creating anything new. It's just trying to retain the same attributes that you have if we move to a cashless society. Because you want it to be a cashless utopia, you don't want it to be a cashless nightmare. Okay, so the other thing that's happening with Bitcoin is we've had steady increasing volume on the network. About 110, 111,000 transactions per day is where we are right now. But it's an excellent curve, and it shows a lot of promise for the future. So what are the benefits for the consumers? I'm just going to go through a few of these, but all of them are up here. And some of the notable ones are you can make a backup of your Bitcoin. You can't make a backup of gold. You can't make a backup of your paper cash. You can make any number of backups for Bitcoin. You can only spend one, but you can at least have several backups. You can even have one that is only known by you in your brain and doesn't exist anywhere else. That's called a brain wallet. You can look that up on the internet. It's something that actually exists where your wealth can be in your brain by some mnemonic password. You also have protection from financial surveillance. You can bypass certain payment blockades with Bitcoin. The most famous payment blockade was WikiLeaks a few years ago, where Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal all refused to process anything for WikiLeaks. But WikiLeaks continued to take donations in Bitcoin because without an intermediary, there's no center or one place to exert political pressure. So Bitcoin becomes very important for payments that are declared politically incorrect. And I already mentioned the fixed supply of 21 million. Since you control your assets, you have protection from confiscation. So there's no third party that's going to be able to confiscate your wealth for any reason. Now, one of the things that's moving very quickly in the consumer world are the mobile wallets. You can download an Android wallet. You can download a wallet for iOS, Apple. These have been out for about 3+ years. And you can do mobile payments today. You don't need to wait for whatever jurisdiction you're in to say, well, now the phone companies and the banks and the regulators all agree this is how we're going to divide up the transaction pie. You can do mobile payments today, and they're happening today in a point-to-point environment, mostly for person-to-person payments. This is a graph that's showing the volume, the daily volume of Bitcoin when it surpassed Western Union. Now, it trades back and forth quite a bit in terms of who is in the lead, but Bitcoin is in the early phases of surpassing Western Union. The next target would be PayPal and Discover, and when Visa passes PayPal and Discover, the only thing that's going to be remaining are the big four credit card giants. Now, if you told me about 3 years ago that these companies would be accepting Bitcoin, I never would have believed you. But these are some of the big names that are accepting Bitcoin today. And there's over 150,000 merchants that accept Bitcoin for payment. What do these merchants see? Well, it's actually even a better currency for merchants because you can extend acceptance to approximately 60+ countries that are underserved or blocked by the credit card giants. This is very important for getting people in different parts of the world on the Bitcoin network because they're currently unbanked. I mean, did you know that someone in Africa cannot even pay for an online university course to better themselves through education because they don't have a bank account, they don't have a credit card, and that's all that the university will accept? So they're locked out of the international economy. Bitcoin allows you to open up your market to the entire global economy, which is, you know, a very good thing if you're a merchant. Some of the other things that is attractive to merchants is there's no chargeback or fraud risk. Since Bitcoin is a bearer instrument, the customer can't deny the transaction and request a chargeback, which is the leading cost for merchants in the credit card world. You have processing fees approaching zero, and you have near immediacy of settlement. So you get paid as a merchant on the day of the transaction or on the hour of the transaction. With the credit cards, it takes about 5 or 7 days to get reimbursed from your bank or your processor after they decide which chargebacks are going to be coming out. The global remittance market, like Western Union, is very much ripe for Bitcoin startups and Bitcoin competition. This is just showing some of the corridors that are the leading corridors for money remittance. USA to Mexico, the UAE to India. Bitcoin startups are focusing on these markets right now because they see that Western Union's charging 10 to 20% to do the transactions. On an annual basis, that's like 1 or 2 months worth of what you're sending on an annual basis. So again, this is an excellent market for Bitcoin to get into. Okay, does anyone know what these two buildings are? Okay, the top one is in Zurich, Switzerland, and it's where the ISO organization maintains their offices. ISO is the organization that is responsible for the 3-digit currency codes. So USD, JPY, AUD, they come out of the nonpolitical ISO organization, and the code that's been proposed for Bitcoin is XBT. The reason it's X is because X is the prefix in ISO for currencies that don't have a national issuer. So gold is XAU, silver is XAG. Now it's still pending, it's not approved yet, but the picture on the bottom is the headquarters for SWIFT. SWIFT, like I mentioned, over the last 5 years, they've devoted a lot of research money to Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain, and they would also like to see a currency code for Bitcoin. So they agreed to co-apply with the foundation to get this pushed through ISO. The problem is that ISO doesn't understand what a decentralized currency is because they keep sending letters back saying you can only submit this if you're the central bank issuer of the currency. So then I have to start all over the whole presentation and get them back into understanding what decentralized currencies are. But these guys aren't waiting. So Reuters, Bloomberg, they're quoting Bitcoin prices as XBT today. And same with Oanda and XE. You can log on to these applications and you'll see XBT as the currency code for Bitcoin, and you can display it against all the other currencies that you've always done in your exchange rate tables. Okay, so I want to conclude by saying a little bit about what a post-legal tender world would look like. Because we've talked about going from central banks to decentral banks. But what does a post-legal tender world look like? Well, monetary decentralization will alter and outlive political institutions. It will survive when certain governments may not survive. All of the Bitcoins won't even be issued until the year 2140. So we're still looking at many, many years before all of those 21 million are issued. But the two primary impacts are going to be monetary policy and fiscal policy. On the monetary policy side, I'm saying that it will be very difficult to have fractional issuance. You won't have fractional reserve banking in the way that we have it now because there's no clear emerging money substitutes that would allow you to do that. So for those of you that don't like fractional reserve banking, this could be a good thing. You have healthy deflation. which means the purchasing power of consumers increases. You have real, legitimate savings, proper investment. So it's more the Austrian school of economics than the Keynesian school of economics. And you have a reduction in detrimental business cycles. So you won't have the boom-bust cycles that, that you see with temperamental monetary policy from the monetary overlords today. I think that the interesting effects, though, are going to be on the fiscal policy side. Because if income, which is a very, very highly progressive tax, if income becomes more difficult to ascertain, governments will move to something like consumption-based taxation. I think that's what's in our future, is more consumption-based taxation. Taxes aren't going away. Bitcoin won't make taxes go away, but it will have an effect on what kind of taxes the government collects. And then also, the other major fiscal policy impact will be a check on spending. There's a certain large government in the world, I won't say who it is, but they do a lot of military spending, and they do it without really raising taxes. Nobody feels it. If you have to actually raise the tax money to spend, it becomes a lot more difficult to start spending on various missions around the world. So Bitcoin will actually have an impact as a check on spending. Okay, so the quotes from the establishment. What do these guys think about Bitcoin? Well, Bill Gates says, I think Bitcoin is a technical tour de force. Al Gore says, I think the fact that within the Bitcoin universe, an algorithm replaces the functions of the government is actually pretty cool. And then you have Nassim Taleb, who's the author of The Black Swan. His book is actually out there on the book stand. He says Bitcoin is the beginning of something great, a currency without a government, something necessary and imperative. I can't leave you without giving you my quote. And my quote is, Bitcoin is to legal tender as BitTorrents are to copyrights. So if you think copyrights have a future, then you think legal tender has a future. This is where you can reach me. And thank you very much. I hope that you enjoyed it.